Okay, so let's ask the right questions first. So, where should you write the code and where should you run it? Well, you can't just write it anywhere and expect it to run. But after today's video, you're gonna be able to write codes that works. So all the videos that I made until today were based on building a solid foundation to make you understand what I'm going to say later. So the purpose is for you to understand and not just to know. So you need to focus and remember. In the last video, we talked about programming. And if you are interested in programming, you need to know that there are specific environments for the execution of every programming languages. If you haven't ever coded before, the word programming environment or development environment may sound foreign to you. Or it is possible that you have never heard about it before. But today, we'll talk about it and you will easily understand what I'm talking about. So the topic that we're going to talk about today are programming and runtime environment, command line interface, and last but not least, we will learn about a few of these environments. So let's start then with the programming or development and the runtime environment. For example, if someone wants to grow his own plants, for the plant to grow, he would need soil, water, and sunlight, and many other things depending on the plant. And he would also need tools like a trowel, trolling shears, many other things too, depending on the plant that he's planting. So these are elements that he needs, and it goes the same for your program. The tool you will be using most of the time will be a code editor, where you are going to write the code. But then there is the environment, where the code will run too. So there are some times when the environment for your code to run is already implemented in your code editor or integrated development environment. But there are other times when your code doesn't have anything to do with your code editor. Then your code can be compiled or just run on a runtime environment. So about the code editor, personally, if I could, I would use VS Code for everything. But it depends on what you want and what you like. There are many choices there. So the programming environment includes all the essential elements that allow us to do programming on a specific technology or language. And what about a runtime environment then? A runtime environment is like a live translation. What do I mean by live translation? Well, what you code isn't what's really understood by the computer. So when you write your code and then put it in the computer, the runtime environment will translate the code as the computer executes it. In the other hand, it can also be a compiler. So a compiler transforms the code into something understandable by the computer, but that is not by the time the computer executes it. So the difference is that a compiler, after you write the code, compiles the code to something understandable by the computer, and then you can just run it on the computer. While with a runtime environment, as it says runtime environment, it translates the code into something understandable by the computer when the code is executed in the engine, let's just say the computer, and then when it runs, the code gets translated when it is executed. So now let's talk about the CLI. Well, the CLI or the command line interface It connects a user to a computer program or operating system while being able to have a deeper connection with the computer. So why do we need that? Well, there is only so much that we can do from the UI of our operating system. So being able to directly interact with it instead is much more important when you're not about using its feature but extending it. So I'm gonna show you where you can find the CLI on Windows. So on Windows, you just right click on the Windows icon and then choose from there maybe Windows Command Prompt or PowerShell or Windows Terminal. Depends on the version of your OS. And also you can just type Windows R and then write CMD and press enter, and that will open the Windows command line interface. And on macOS, you just need to type command space and then enter terminal, and that is the CLI for macOS. And for Linux people, I won't show it to you. Sorry, it's too hard for Linux. Not really. And by the way, the CLI is already a programming environment for your OS to a certain extent. For example, you can use Bash programming if you have Bash on your computer, or PowerShell scripting on Windows, but this video is not about that, so maybe you can look that up if that interests you. So let's look at a few environments. So we've talked about programming languages. And like any other languages, in order to be understood, you have to speak the language. And computers don't just have one language. There are different languages for different technologies or platforms. So let's talk about the web, for example. Well, we've already talked about it in 2 other videos before, as I really want you to understand the basic principle and the behind the scenes of the web. So as everybody is using the web, what I want to talk to you about here in this environment part of the video is the programming language of the web, which is none other than JavaScript. Yes, it runs on every browser, and it can also run on any platform through Node.js, which is a runtime environment, as we've talked before, outside the browser. So, if you want to code for the web, you need to make sure you know JavaScript. And a JavaScript course is coming, so stay tuned. So, if you want to use it, well, for this first example, you don't need anything other than a web browser. In Google Chrome, you can access the console with Ctrl-Shift-G, or on Mac Ctrl-Option-G, and then from here you can already write some JavaScript. So remember when I told you about pre-made functions? Let me show you one of them in any web browser. If we put alert here with a text to display inside the parentheses, we will get an alert pop-up with a message we put inside it. Let's try it. Ta-da! Cool, right? Yeah, but that's good and all. There are many things that we can do from there, though. But that's not really how web developers do it. So a simple way to do it, other than having to manually open the console, is to add the JavaScript inside our HTML file. So the right way to use JavaScript is to include it with the HTML code, maybe inside the same file or a separate file, like this. So in my HTML file, let's add a script tag and just write the JavaScript here. Voila. And when I open the browser, our code is executed. Cool, right? And so Another way to run JavaScript also is by installing Node.js. And then we can create a JavaScript file, and after that I would personally use VS Code to program for the web. So if we create a JavaScript file and put some code console.log in order to print on the terminal, and then execute it with the command node, and there you go. So that's it for JS for now. We've already seen 3 ways to write JavaScript and 3 different places to write it on. Now let's talk about mobile development with Android. So most mobile phones have Android as their operating system. So if iPhone people, you didn't know that, well, Android is what's on Samsung. Yeah, you'll thank me later for that. So it's an operating system that runs on most smartphones and tablets. So it's just like iOS, macOS, and Windows. So it's been created by Google, and it equips the majority of current mobile phones. To make an Android app, formerly done with Java, now we use Kotlin. The code is compiled to bytecode and then interpreted by the Java virtual machine, which is a part of Java Runtime Environment. So the Kotlin code is compiled to bytecode and then interpreted by a Java virtual machine, which is part of a Java Runtime Environment. So all of that is thankfully already taken care of by Android Studio, which is the IDE already provided by Google if we want to write for Android. So let's code our Kotlin equivalent to printing a line in the command line interface. So let's say print line. And now we won't necessarily need Android Studio. We just need to install Kotlin compiler and Java runtime. So to compile the Kotlin file, we just need to run Kotlin, the name of our script, and then the name of the compiled file. And then we just need to run it with the Java runtime with Java and the name of our file. And by the way, for Android development, really, that was just to show you how you can run a Kotlin file, which is the programming language if you want to code for Android. But you won't need to do that really. The only thing you need to do is download Android Studio and install it, and you're good to go. So next, what about programming for iOS devices, for iPhones, and also for iPad and macOS for that matter? So thankfully, the programming language that we use for all of Apple's operating systems is Swift. Yes. So if you want to code for Apple devices, you need Swift. So Swift, after you code it, it will be compiled with the Swift compiler, and then it just runs on the Apple device for which you have designed the code. So let's create our Swift file to print a line and save the file as script.swift. Okay. Another way to go is installing Xcode. So it may take a little long, depending on your internet connection. But after installing Xcode from the App Store, we just need to run Swift and then script.swift, and that's all. And so at the same time, Xcode is an integrated development environment like Android Studio, from where you can already do all of that. So an integrated development environment is a combination of your code editor with almost everything that's needed for your development. So you can run your code already from your IDE. So how about machine learning then? If you haven't ever heard about machine learning, well, machine learning is making the machine learn. Well, you see, if you teach a computer to recognize a pineapple 10 times, now you can point a camera at any fruit and it will tell you that it is a pineapple or not. Cool, right? Well, we can use it for awesome things. A lot of awesome things. So you can do that with Python. And to run Python, you just need the Python program. First, download it, then install it. And now, let's create our Python file. Voila. Let's write some code. Voila. And now, if we just write Python and our script, press enter. Ta-da! Good, right? That was an easy one. So the list goes on for any programming languages and many technologies for that matter. So of course we will extend on each of these programming languages later. But today I just wanted to talk to you about this programming or development environment with runtime environments and compilers for you to really understand what they do. And so now I believe that you know that a development environment with the compiler and the runtime environment, that's all used to write a program and to run them. We've also talked about the CLI, which will help us a lot in using part of the computer that's not really accessible through the UI of the computer. And last but not least, we've talked about four really important languages and technologies, which are the web, which we use JavaScript on, mobile development with Android, with Kotlin, and iOS development with Swift, and last but not least, machine learning with Python. So I hope you've understood more about programming and its environment after watching this, because understanding this concept is really, really important. So don't forget to like the video and subscribe. See you in the next video. Bye.